Futures trading involves risk and is not suitable for all investors. Content provided in this segment is meant for educational purposes and is not a solicitation to buy or sell commodities.
Hello, and welcome to the August 28th edition of Basis Loaded with Joe Schmit, the final edition of Basis Loaded in August. It has been a scorcher here in Chicago this week. Next week, highs of 72 and lots of sun. So it's looking like fall. What better way to celebrate than with the latest from the NDPSR report? And we'll start this week with butter. This butter number coming in at 309.95 represents a -4 to the CME 1-week average of 314.10. So the CME takes a leg higher. Buyers here in the real world not impressed as displayed here with this -4 basis. Of course, -4 is well below our expected 2-cent positive basis. The CME, as I mentioned, was up 4. Here on the NAS, down a penny. So disappointing price in the butter with that negative basis. Also disappointing the volume the last 2 weeks. So you'll remember 3 weeks ago on the CME, we traded 103 loads at the CME, which was just a staggering amount of volume changing hands on the CME open outcry. And that translates to about 4.3 million pounds of product. However, most of that should have been reported last week if you look at last week's volume, short of even 3 million pounds. So let's just say that it traded last week, but it didn't ship until this week. So that bubble and the snake in the volume moves forward, and we're seeing a little bit of that. North of 4.8 million pounds changing hands or reported here on the NDPSR. But then again, last week we traded an additional 54 loads at the CME. So an additional 2.2 million pounds. So the 4.3 traded on the CME 3 weeks ago, 2.2 million traded last week, almost 6.5 million. Here, the total NDPSR for the last 2 weeks, barely surpassing that 6.5 million pound mark. So most of the volume is at the CME. And if it is a manufacturer that is the primary seller on the CME, then that means that the prior contracted sales based on the CME average are close to zero. If we had some secondary sales on the CME, then maybe the story isn't quite as bad. But it's interesting on this big push at the CME with a lot of enthusiasm here on the NDPSR light volume and negative basis. Up next in the cheese, we'll start with blocks. Coming in at $2.20. That is a nice price. That is a +8 to the CME 1-week average of 192.20. We traded 6 loads at the CME, so not a lot of volume on the CME, not a lot of volume here on the NDPSR, falling 2 million pounds short of our expected 12.5 million. So a really nice price at the CME on lighter than expected volume. So that 192.20, that's the last CME weekly average that we have in the 190s prior to CME prices moving anywhere from 10 to even 20 cents higher on the dailies. So last weekly average in the mid-190s prior to a 10-cent increase for next week. I would doubt that +8 positive basis continues into next week. I think we're going to see a big contraction of that basis as buyers kind of turn their nose up at prices well north of the $2 level. And in the barrels, 209.35, that represents a +3 to the CME 2-week average of 206.55. We traded 2 loads in the barrel on the CME last week. And again, similar to blocks, light volume here in the barrels. Just a little bit north of 11 million pounds and well short of our 13 million expected barrel volume. +3 basis is at the low end of our expected barrel basis. You'll notice, though, however, the barrel is still carrying a 9-cent premium to the block, as this barrel, this premium product, just continues to buoy the cheese average. Barrel's premium by 9 cents once again, continuing what has been the trend for about the last 3 months. Up next is Whey, 48.90. That represents let's just say a -10 to the CME 1-week average of 58.65. We traded 2 loads on the CME last week. This is the first week off of the high at the CME It's interesting, though, here week to week on the NDPSR, we also have a little bit of a downtick. So possibly we were thinking that as the CME came off its high, that we would see this basis narrow, minus 10, certainly not the case. We did trade a lot of volume here on the NDPSR, almost 6 million pounds, so about 1.5 million over our expected 4.5 level. So there still seems to be an appetite for Whey at the 50 cent or lower level. Judging by the action here on the NDPSR, there is zero appetite for Whey at the altitude that the CME was able to achieve. Of course, in Whey, we talk about the CME average for most products, but in the Whey, we like to talk about the prior week's NDPSR. And the prior week's NDPSR is this August 10th number of 47.63. So big volume this week, still at, call it, a penny and a quarter premium to prior week's NDPSR. So even though prices here in the NDPSR don't resemble the levels that we're seeing at the CME, still really nice prices in comparison to the prior week's NDPSR price. And again, robust volume in the Whey. And then lastly, Nonfat, 123.94. That's essentially parity to the CME 1 week average of 123.80. We traded 22 loads on the CME last week, so big volume on the CME. However, here on the NDPSR, falling short of the 15 million pound level, so disappointing. And what's actually even more disappointing, if you go back to that August 3rd volume, they revised that volume down about 4 million. So we're losing sales, lower than expected sales this week. They're taking away sales that we thought we had in prior weeks. All in all, once again, similar to cheese, the story here on the NDPSR report does not come close to keeping up with the enthusiasm that we're seeing at the CME. So this is week 4 of 5 of the August pricing cycle, currently getting August class 3 of 2060 with the August class 4 all the way up at 2150. If you carry current CME equivalents out through the entire 4-week September pricing cycle, getting a September class 3 of 2180 and September class 4 of 2180. So we have parity in that 3-4 spread if everything holds as it currently stands at the CME. We'll see what they have in store for us in the weeks to come. On behalf of Paige and the entire Everag Insights team, thanks so much. See you next week. Bye.